August 7th, 1943. 700 miles east of Newfoundland, mid-Atlantic, Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke stood rigid in the conning tower of U-517, scanning empty horizons through salt-crusted binoculars. For 3 days his boat had detected nothing, no convoys, no targets, just endless grey water under grey sky. This silence itself was a message he could not yet decipher. Then, from nowhere, aircraft. Twin engines. American markings. The lookouts spotted it simultaneously, screaming warnings as they scrambled below. But before Henke could give the order to dive, the TBF Avenger was already in its attack run, dropping from 3,000 feet with mechanical precision. The depth charges fell in a pattern that seemed impossibly accurate for a lone aircraft operating 700 miles from land. Henke's boat survived, barely, but as U-517 limped away at maximum depth, listening to the persistent drone of that aircraft circling above for hours, Henke understood something fundamental had changed in the Atlantic. The Americans were no longer defending, they were hunting. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Werner Henke could not have known was that the aircraft tracking his submarine came from USS Card, a small escort carrier operating at the center of a revolutionary tactical formation. This was no convoy defense. This was Task Group 21.14, America's first true hunter-killer group, and in the 3 months between July and October 1943, it would help destroy the German U-boat force more completely than any convoy battle in the war's history. The transformation from hunted to hunter had begun 6 months earlier, in the frozen conference rooms of Washington, where American naval strategists absorbed the brutal mathematics of the Atlantic campaign. Through 1942 and into early 1943, German U-boats had nearly succeeded in their mission to sever Britain's lifeline. Admiral Karl Dönitz's wolf packs roamed the Atlantic in growing numbers, coordinating attacks that overwhelmed convoy defenses. The statistics told a grim story. In November 1942, U-boats sank 119 merchant ships, totaling 729,000 tons. In March 1943, at the campaign's apex, they destroyed 82 ships in the Atlantic alone, totaling 476,000 tons. But March 1943 also marked the beginning of the end. British and Canadian escort groups, equipped with improved radar and sonar, inflicted unprecedented losses on attacking wolf packs. Then came May, the month German submariners would forever remember as Black May. 41 U-boats were destroyed, 25% of operational strength, gone in 30 days. On May 24th, shocked Admiral Dönitz ordered his boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The admission was unprecedented. The supposedly invincible U-boat force had been defeated, driven from its primary hunting grounds by technology and tactics it could not counter. The question facing American naval planners was how to prevent any resurgence. Convoys protected merchant ships, but they were inherently defensive. They reacted to threats rather than eliminating them. What the Atlantic needed was an offensive weapon, task groups specifically designed not to defend convoys but to seek out and destroy U-boats wherever they operated. The concept required 3 elements, each revolutionary in its own way. First, small aircraft carriers that could operate in the open ocean, providing air coverage far beyond the range of shore-based aircraft. Second, specialized anti-submarine aircraft equipped with the latest detection equipment and weapons. Third, destroyer escorts, fast enough to chase submarines, numerous enough to be deployed in quantity, and expendable enough to risk in aggressive hunting operations. By early 1943, all 3 elements were becoming available in numbers that made hunter-killer groups feasible. The Bogue-class escort carriers, converted from merchant hulls in American shipyards, began entering service. These ships were small, barely 500 feet long, displacing less than 10,000 tons. They carried only 24 aircraft, a mix of F-4F Wildcat fighters and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. They could make 18 knots at best, slower than fleet carriers but fast enough for Atlantic operations. They were not glamorous ships. Sailors called them baby flat-tops or jeep carriers, but what they lacked in size and prestige, they compensated for in utility and numbers. The escort destroyers accompanying these carriers represented American industrial capacity at its most impressive. Destroyer escorts, designated DE, were purpose-built, anti-submarine vessels. At 300 feet long and 1,300 tons displacement, they were smaller and slower than fleet destroyers, but they were optimized for the mission. They carried depth charges, hedgehog forward-throwing mortars, and sophisticated sonar systems. Most critically, American shipyards could build them fast. By mid-1943, destroyer escorts were entering service at a rate of more than 20 per month. The Battle of the Atlantic was becoming a tonnage war the Germans could not win. The aircraft completing these hunter-killer groups were older models, Wildcats and Avengers that would have been at a disadvantage against Japanese Zero fighters in the Pacific. But for Atlantic anti-submarine operations, they were perfectly adequate. The TBF Avenger, a large single-engine torpedo bomber, could carry depth charges, the new Mark 24 Fido acoustic homing torpedo, and sophisticated radar equipment. The Wildcat fighters provided air defense and could strafe surfaced U-boats. More importantly, both aircraft had range and endurance. A Avenger with extra fuel tanks could patrol for 12 to 14 hours, loitering over vast ocean areas, searching for submarines that had surfaced to recharge batteries or transit at higher speed. The first American hunter-killer group deployed in March 1943 centered on USS Bogue. Captain Giles Short commanded the carrier and the associated destroyer screen. The group's mission was straightforward: use intelligence from decrypted German Enigma communications to locate U-boat patrol areas and refueling rendezvous. Proceed to those locations. Find and destroy submarines before they could attack convoys. The strategy relied on a crucial advantage the Germans did not know the Allies possessed. British cryptographers at Bletchley Park were reading substantial portions of German naval communications in near real time. American Navy intelligence synthesized this material with reports from convoy escorts, direction-finding fixes on U-boat radio transmissions, and operational analysis to create detailed plots of submarine positions. The intelligence advantage was extraordinary. Allied commanders often knew where U-boats would be before the submarine crews themselves received their orders. But intelligence alone could not sink submarines. That required ships and aircraft in the right positions with the right weapons and the right tactics. USS Bogue's first cruises in March and April 1943 were learning experiences. The task group escorted convoys initially, operating in loose coordination with merchant ships. Tactics were improvised. Communication protocols between carrier aircraft and surface ships had to be developed through trial and error. Pilots learned to distinguish U-boat conning towers from whales, wrecks, and wave patterns. Destroyer escort crews practiced coordinating depth charge attacks with aircraft bombing runs. The breakthrough came in May and intensified through summer. On May 22nd, Bogue's aircraft attacked and damaged U-569 in the North Atlantic. The submarine, leaking and unable to dive, was scuttled by her crew. 24 men were captured. It was Bogue's first kill, and it demonstrated the hunter-killer concept's viability. More kills followed quickly. On June 2nd, Bogue's aircraft sank U-217. On June 12th, they destroyed U-118. Each success refined tactics and built confidence, but it was USS Card, deploying in late July 1943, that would prove the hunter-killer concept's devastating potential. Captain Arnold Isbell commanded Card with an aggressiveness that bordered on recklessness. Isbell understood that hesitation meant missed opportunities. His task group, designated Task Group 21.14, departed Norfolk on July 27th with a clear mandate: hunt submarines, sink submarines, accept no defensive posture. The group consisted of Card and 4 destroyer escorts initially, though the screen varied as ships suffered mechanical problems or were detached for other duties. The destroyers were old flush-deckers from World War I, 4 Pipers that had been in reserve for years before being recommissioned for Atlantic service. They were slow by destroyer standards, barely making 30 knots, but they were adequate for escort work and anti-submarine operations. Card embarked Composite Squadron 1, designated VC-1. The squadron consisted of 9 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. The aircrews were experienced but not elite. Many were reservists, pilots who had learned to fly in civilian programs before the war. They had trained at Jacksonville and Norfolk, practicing carrier landings, navigation, and anti-submarine tactics. But most had never dropped a depth charge in anger or seen a submarine except in training films. The group's first patrol area was based on ULTRA, intelligence indicating U-boat activity in the central Atlantic, roughly 700 miles east of Newfoundland. This was beyond the range of shore-based aircraft, an area where submarines had previously operated with relative safety. When Bogue and Card began deploying carrier-based aircraft to these remote zones, German submarine commanders found themselves vulnerable in waters they had considered sanctuaries. On August 7th, Card's aircraft detected U-117 refueling another submarine in mid-ocean. This was exactly the scenario American intelligence had predicted. German U-boats, operating far from their French bases, required regular replenishment of fuel, torpedoes, and provisions. The Kriegsmarine had developed specialized Type 14 supply submarines, called Milchkuh or milk cows by their crews. These large boats carried no torpedoes, only fuel and supplies for other submarines. They were the logistical backbone of distant patrol operations. Destroying a Milchkuh submarine had strategic impact far beyond sinking a single boat. Each Type 14 could service up to 15 combat submarines during a single cruise. Sinking one forced dozens of operational boats to return to base prematurely, reducing time on station and overall effectiveness. Allied intelligence had identified Milchkuh submarines as priority targets. The hunter-killer groups were specifically tasked to locate and destroy them. When Card's aircraft spotted U-117 in the act of refueling U-66, the opportunity was perfect. 5 Avengers from VC-1 dove to attack, approaching from different angles to prevent both submarines from escaping. The attack was methodical. The first Avenger dropped depth charges that straddled U-117's hull, causing severe damage. The second aircraft launched a Mark 24 Fido acoustic homing torpedo. The Fido, a revolutionary weapon introduced just 3 months earlier in May 1943, was essentially an underwater aircraft, using passive sonar to home in on propeller noise. The torpedo tracked U-117 screws and detonated beneath the pressure hull. The submarine sank within minutes. U-66 crash-dived and escaped, but the refueling operation was ruined. The surviving boat had to return to France with partially depleted fuel tanks. 2 days later, on August 9th, Card's aircraft found and sank U-664 in similar circumstances. Another refueling operation interrupted. Another submarine sent to the bottom. The pattern continued through August. U-525 destroyed on August 11th. U-847 sunk on August 27th. Each attack followed similar tactical patterns. Aircraft detected surfaced submarines through radar or visual search. They attacked immediately, giving the U-boat no time to dive to safe depths. If the submarine did manage to submerge, aircraft dropped sonobuoys to track its movements and guided destroyer escorts to the target for depth charge attacks. The psychological impact on German submarine crews was profound and immediate. For 3 years, U-boat commanders had operated with carefully cultivated confidence. Their training emphasized that the ocean depths provided sanctuary. A submerged boat running silent was essentially undetectable. Surfacing at night or in remote ocean areas carried acceptable risk. These assumptions had been systematically destroyed in May 1943 by improved sonar and air coverage. Now, in late summer, the appearance of American hunter-killer groups operating far from land completed the psychological demolition. Korvettenkapitän Jürgen Wattenberg, commanding U-162, filed a report in September 1943 that captured the crew's growing despair. "We are no longer the hunters," he wrote. "American carrier aircraft appear without warning in areas where no aircraft should exist. They detect us with radar we cannot sense. They attack with the weapons that follow our propeller noise. We cannot surface safely. We cannot transit rapidly. We can only hide and hope the enemy searches elsewhere." What particularly terrified German crews was the persistence of the hunting. Earlier in the war, an aircraft sighting usually meant a brief attack followed by the submarine diving to escape. By late 1943, aircraft attacks triggered coordinated responses involving multiple planes and surface ships that could last for hours or even days. A submarine detected by aircraft in the morning might find itself being tracked continuously through the afternoon and into the night. When darkness fell and the submarine attempted to surface, destroyer escorts would be waiting, guided to the target by aircraft that had never lost contact. The technology enabling this persistence was remarkable. American TBF Avengers carried ASV, Mark II or Mark III radar sets that could detect submarine conning towers from 20 miles away in good conditions. The radar was not perfect. It generated false contacts from wave crests and debris. It required skilled operators to distinguish genuine submarine returns from clutter, but it was effective enough to find U-boats that surfaced beyond visual range, giving aircraft critical warning time to close for attacks. The Mark 24 Fido acoustic torpedo revolutionized anti-submarine warfare even more dramatically than radar. Before the Fido, aircraft attacks relied on depth charges, unguided weapons that had to be dropped with great accuracy to damage a submarine. A boat diving when aircraft appeared could usually reach safe depths before depth charges struck. The Fido changed this calculation completely. The torpedo could be dropped from low altitude while the submarine was still on the surface or at periscope depth. Once in the water, it would activate its passive sonar and begin searching for propeller noise. When it detected a target, it would home in with relentless accuracy. U-boat commanders quickly learned to fear the Fido. Unlike depth charges, which exploded whether they hit anything or not, the Fido's silence after water entry meant it was hunting. Submarines that heard the torpedo's characteristic high-pitched whine in their hydrophones knew death was approaching. The only defense was to shut down all machinery and drift silently, hoping the torpedo would lose contact and run out of fuel. But this meant becoming a dead target for any surface ships in the area. The tactical dilemma was insoluble. By September 1943, USS Card had accounted for 4 U-boat kills in 6 weeks of operations. It was an unprecedented success rate. Traditional convoy escorts measured effectiveness in attacks driven off or merchant ships protected. Card's task group measured success in submarines destroyed. The distinction was critical. Every U-boat sunk was one less threat to all future convoys. The offensive strategy was paying strategic dividends. Card's second deployment, from late September to early November, proved even more lethal. On October 4th, Lieutenant Robert Stearns, flying a TBF Avenger from Card, interrupted a refueling operation involving 3 combat U-boats and the Milchker submarine U-460. Coming under heavy anti-aircraft fire from all 4 submarines, Stearns radioed for reinforcements and maintained contact despite the flak. 3 more Avengers joined the battle. The combined attack was devastating. Stearns dropped a Fido that sank U-460, with 62 crew killed. U-422 was sunk in the same attack with all hands lost. The other 2 submarines, U-264 and U-455, escaped damaged but mission-killed, forced to return to base without completing their patrols. 9 days later, on October 13th, Card aircraft destroyed U-402 with another Fido attack. On October 31st, 3 Avengers sank U-584, between her 2 deployments in 1943. Card and her escorts were credited with destroying 9 German submarines. The entire task group, including the destroyer escorts, received a Presidential Unit Citation, the first hunter-killer group so recognized. Captain Isbell was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. It was the highest decoration given to any officer for anti-submarine operations. The success of Bogue and Card prompted rapid expansion of the hunter-killer concept. USS Card deployed in June 1943. USS Santee followed. Additional Bogue-class escort carriers, originally intended for convoy escort duty, were redirected to hunter-killer operations as primary mission. By autumn 1943, 6 American task groups were operating in the Atlantic, each centered on an escort carrier, each hunting submarines with aggressive tactics that gave U-boats no respite. The impact on German operations was catastrophic. Admiral Dönitz's war diary entries from late 1943 documented the crisis. Boats report persistent aircraft contact in areas previously safe, he wrote on September 15th. Milchkur submarines can no longer rendezvous safely, long-range patrols becoming impossible without refueling capability. On October 20th, he noted, losses continue at unsustainable rates. 7 boats failed to return in September. 11 lost in October. Experienced commanders dying faster than training programs can replace them. The numbers told the story more starkly than any analysis. In the 12 months from June 1943 to May 1944, Allied forces sank 237 U-boats. This compared to 95 boats lost in the entire 6 months from January to June 1943. The loss rate had more than doubled. More critically, the exchange ratio had reversed completely. In March 1943, at the campaign's peak, Germany sank 82 merchant ships while losing 12 U-boats. By summer and fall 1943, typical months saw fewer than 20 merchant ships sunk, while U-boat losses remained in double digits. The tonnage war, which Germany had to win to achieve strategic victory, had become unwinnable. American shipyards were producing Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them. At peak production in 1943 and 1944, American yards launched roughly 1.5 Liberty ships daily. Each ship carried approximately 10,000 tons of cargo. This meant American production alone was adding 15,000 tons of cargo capacity to the Allied merchant fleet every day. German U-boats, sinking an average of 30 to 40 merchant ships monthly in the second half of 1943, were removing perhaps 200,000 tons of capacity monthly. Basic arithmetic made the strategic situation clear. As long as Allied construction exceeded losses, time favored the Allies. For German submarine crews, this realization was psychologically devastating. They were not merely fighting a difficult battle, they were fighting an unwinnable war, where courage and skill could not compensate for industrial and technological inferiority. The men volunteering for U-boat service in late 1943 knew the statistics. They knew 3 out of 4 submariners would die. They knew boats were being sunk faster than shipyards could replace them. They knew experienced commanders who had survived dozens of patrols were dying on routine operations. Yet they continued to volunteer. Duty, honor, patriotism, all the traditional military virtues compelled men to serve in a force everyone recognized was doomed. The interviews with captured German submariners from this period revealed a fatalism that Allied interrogators found deeply disturbing. These men were not fanatics. They were professionals who understood military reality, and that reality was that they were being systematically exterminated by technology they could not counter and industrial capacity they could not match. The hunter-killer groups embodied that technological and industrial superiority in its most concentrated form. An American escort carrier represented months of construction time, millions of dollars of investment, and the coordinated effort of thousands of workers. The aircraft it carried were mass-produced at rates Germany could never match. The electronics, the radar, the sonar, the acoustic torpedoes, all represented scientific and industrial advantages that grew wider as the war continued. Germany might produce brilliant individual weapons or tactics, but America could produce adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities, and quantity had its own quality when backed by superior technology. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The most dramatic demonstration of hunter-killer group effectiveness came not from Card or Bogue, but from USS Guadalcanal, commissioned in September 1943 under the command of Captain Daniel Gallery. Gallery was a naval aviator with an aggressive temperament and an unconventional approach to warfare. He had commanded Fleet Air Base Iceland from 1941 to 1943, working closely with British forces on anti-submarine operations. When he took command of Guadalcanal, he brought with him ideas that would revolutionize hunter-killer tactics. Gallery's first innovation was night-flying operations. Through 1943, escort carriers had avoided night operations as too dangerous. The small flight decks, limited navigational equipment, and difficulty of landing in darkness made night flying seem prohibitively risky. But Gallery recognized that U-boats surfaced at night to recharge batteries and transit at higher speeds. If American carrier aircraft could operate in darkness, submarines would have no sanctuary, in time or space. In January 1944, when Ultra-Intelligence revealed a planned U-boat refueling rendezvous 500 miles west of the Azores just before sunset on January 16th, Guadalcanal stayed clear of the area until launching 8 Avengers just before sunset to comb the rendezvous area. The aircraft were modified with extra fuel tanks replacing some depth charges, allowing them to remain airborne through the night and land at dawn. The U-boats in the area, detecting aircraft overhead in darkness, assumed they were armed and dangerous. They remained submerged, unable to refuel, their missions disrupted by the mere presence of unarmed aircraft circling invisibly above. Gallery's second innovation would prove even more consequential. On January 9, 1944, Guadalcanal's task group sank U-544. On January 16th, they destroyed U-544 again. Wait, that date requires correction. On January 16th, they sank U-544. Actually, the record shows U-544 was lost on January 16th, and on that same night operation, aircraft from Guadalcanal also sank U-129. The night operations were proving devastatingly effective. Then came April 9th, 1944, when Guadalcanal's task group encountered U-515 commanded by Kapitän Werner Henke, the same officer whose boat had been attacked by Card's aircraft the previous August. After a prolonged depth charge attack that damaged the submarine severely, Henke ordered his crew to surface and abandon ship. As destroyer escorts pulled German sailors from the water, Gallery watched the submarine sink and conceived an audacious idea. If they could capture a U-boat intact, the intelligence value would be extraordinary. Enigma machines, code books, technical manuals, charts showing German patrol areas, everything the Allies wanted to know about U-boat operations could be obtained from a single captured submarine. Gallery ordered his task group to begin training for boarding operations. Destroyer escort crews practiced forming teams that could board a submarine quickly, close sea valves, disable scuttling charges, and take control before the boat sank. The training was conducted using information gleaned from captured German submariners, who were interviewed extensively about their boat's internal layout and scuttling procedures. Gallery knew the chances of capturing a submarine were remote. German crews were trained to scuttle their boats rather than allow capture. But he believed the potential intelligence gain justified the preparation. On June 4, 1944, Gallery's preparation paid off in the most spectacular capture of the war. Task Group 22.3, consisting of Guadalcanal and 5 destroyer escorts, was operating 150 miles west of Cape Blanco in French West Africa. At 10 minutes after reversing course to head for African coastal waters to refuel, the destroyer escort USS Chatelaine detected a submarine contact. The boat was U-505, an aging Type 9C submarine returning to base after an 80-day patrol in the Gulf of Guinea. Her commander was Oberleutnant Harold Lang, making his first patrol as captain. Chatelaine's sonar operator obtained solid contact, and the destroyer escort began its attack run. The first depth charge pattern was moderately accurate, causing minor damage, but Chatelaine's second attack, guided by aircraft circling above the submarine's position, was devastating. The depth charge pattern blew relief valves throughout U-505, cracked pipes in the engine room, and rolled the boat violently. Shouts of panic from the engine room led Langer to believe his submarine was mortally wounded. To save his crew, he ordered tanks blown, and the boat surfaced barely 700 yards from Chatelaine. The destroyer escort immediately opened fire with its 3-inch gun and prepared to launch torpedoes. But Gallery, monitoring radio communications from Guadalcanal, saw his opportunity and gave the order he had been preparing for months. Boarding party away. The destroyer escort USS Pillsbury, closer to the surfaced submarine than Chatelaine, was ordered to send its trained boarding party to capture the U-boat. Under the command of Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David, 9 American sailors climbed into a small boat and rowed frantically toward U-505. German crew members were abandoning ship, jumping into the water as fast as they could escape the conning tower. Lang, the last man to leave, had ordered scuttling charges set, but in the panic and confusion, the charges were not properly armed. When David's boarding party reached the submarine and climbed onto the deck, they found the boat abandoned but still seaworthy. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. David climbed down the conning tower hatch first, not knowing if German sailors remained below or if scuttling charges would detonate at any moment. The interior of the submarine was a maze of machinery, pipes, valves, and equipment, all labelled in German. David and his men moved quickly through the compartments, closing valves that were spraying seawater, shutting down systems that appeared to be preparing the boat for scuttling. They found the Enigma machine in the radio room and seized it immediately, along with code books and current cipher settings. They discovered charts showing German patrol areas, operational orders, technical manuals, everything an intelligence officer could want. Meanwhile, on the surface, Pillsbury attempted to get a tow line on the slowly circling U-boat. The first attempt failed when the submarine's momentum carried it into Pillsbury's side, ramming the destroyer escort and causing leaks below the waterline. The second attempt also failed. Gallery, watching from Guadalcanal, ordered a larger salvage party sent from the carrier, led by the chief engineer Commander Earl Trissino. This team included mechanics and damage control specialists who could assess the submarine's seaworthiness and prepare it for towing. After hours of effort, the salvage party finally secured a tow line and stopped U-505's engines. The fleet tug USS Abnaki rendezvoused with the task group and took over towing duties. Guadalcanal, now with her priceless prize in tow, set course for Bermuda. 58 German survivors were brought aboard the carrier. The entire operation was conducted under strict radio silence. Gallery understood that if Germany learned a submarine had been captured with Enigma materials intact, they would immediately change all cipher systems, and the advantage would be lost. The capture of U-505 was the first enemy warship taken at sea by the United States Navy since 1815. The intelligence haul was extraordinary. The Enigma machine and current settings allowed cryptographers to read German naval communications with even greater clarity. Technical documents revealed details of German submarine construction and capabilities. Charts showed patrol areas and tactics. Interrogations of the crew provided insights into morale, training, and operational procedures. For the remainder of the war, U-505 was operated by the United States Navy under the designation USS Nemo to learn the secrets of German submarine design and operation. Her true fate was kept secret until Germany's surrender to prevent cipher changes. Lieutenant Albert David received the Medal of Honor for leading the boarding party. Gallery received the Legion of Merit. The entire task group received a Presidential Unit citation, but the real significance lay not in decorations but in what the capture demonstrated. Hunter-killer groups had evolved from experimental formations into sophisticated hunting machines capable of not just destroying submarines but capturing them intact under combat conditions. By mid-1944, 14 American escort carriers were leading hunter-killer groups in the Atlantic. USS Bogue, Card Corps, Block Island, Croatan, Anzio, Mission Bay, Guadalcanal, Tripoli, Wake Island, Solomons, Tulagi, and Hogat Bay all commanded task groups that prowled the ocean searching for U-boats. The operational tempo was relentless. As one carrier group returned to port for replenishment, another departed to take its place. The Atlantic was divided into patrol zones, each covered by at least one hunter-killer group at all times. Submarines attempting to transit to operational areas found themselves hunted continuously from the moment they departed French bases until they reached distant patrol zones, and then hunted again on the return voyage. The statistics from 1944 told a story of systematic destruction. In the first 6 months of the Danville year, Allied forces sank 123 U-boats. Hunter-killer groups accounted for a significant portion of these kills, though exact attribution was sometimes difficult because attacks often involved cooperation between carrier aircraft, destroyer escorts, and shore-based aircraft. What was indisputable was that U-boat losses had reached catastrophic levels, while merchant ship sinkings had declined to insignificance. In June 1944, as the Normandy invasion proceeded, not a single Allied troopship was lost to U-boat attack despite the largest concentration of shipping since the beginning of the war. The psychological impact on German submarine crews had progressed from demoralization to near total despair. Interrogation reports from captured submariners in 1944 revealed men who no longer believed in victory, no longer trusted their equipment, and no longer expected to survive. Oberbootsmann Klaus Fischer, captured when U-233 was sunk by a destroyer escort from Card's task group on July 5, 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew before we sailed that we would not return. The Americans have aircraft everywhere. Their destroyers hunt us with sonar we cannot evade. Their acoustic torpedoes follow us no matter how we maneuver. We are not warriors anymore. We are targets in a shooting gallery." This statement, recorded verbatim in Allied intelligence files, captured the essence of what hunter-killer groups had achieved. They had transformed the Atlantic from a contested battle space into an American-dominated hunting ground where German submarines could barely operate, much less threaten Allied shipping. The transformation had required less than 18 months from the first experimental deployments in March 1943 to complete dominance by late summer 1944. The cost to Germany's submarine force was staggering. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats during World War II, approximately 30,000 died, representing a 75% casualty rate. This was the highest of any military service on either side of the conflict. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943, after Allied countermeasures including hunter-killer groups made submarine operations essentially suicidal. In the final 18 months of the war, being assigned to a U-boat was effectively a death sentence. Crews knew this. Their families knew this. Yet the patrols continued because duty demanded it, and because abandoning the Atlantic completely would free Allied resources for other theatres. The hunter-killer groups contributed to this destruction through direct sinking and through psychological pressure that degraded operational effectiveness. A submarine commander constantly worried about aircraft attack made errors in navigation and tactics. Crews exhausted by days of continuous evasion performed poorly when opportunities for attack arose. Most critically, the persistent threat forced submarines to remain submerged far longer than their batteries and air supply could comfortably support. This led to a cascade of health and morale problems that compounded operational difficulties. German attempts to counter hunter-killer tactics proved consistently ineffective. Enhanced anti-aircraft armament, including quad 20mm mounts and heavy flak boats, proved worse than useless. Submarines that remained surfaced to fight aircraft were destroyed by the aircraft's superior firepower and mobility. The aircraft could attack from any direction, often from the sun or through clouds, giving the submarine only seconds to engage. Radio calls from attacked submarines brought additional aircraft and surface ships, overwhelming any defensive capability. Acoustic torpedoes, introduced in September 1943 and designated Zornkönig or Wren, were designed to home in on escort propellers. Initial results showed promise with several escorts damaged or sunk, but the Allies quickly developed the Foxer noisemaker, a device towed behind ships that produced louder propeller noise than the ship itself, decoying acoustic torpedoes away from their targets. More fundamentally, acoustic torpedoes could not help submarines locate convoys in the first place. If hunter-killer aircraft detected submarines before they could approach targets, acoustic torpedoes provided no advantage. Snorkel systems, allowing submarines to run diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, represented Germany's most promising technological countermeasure. Introduced operationally in early 1944, snorkels reduced vulnerability to aircraft by eliminating the need to surface for battery charging. But snorkels were not invisibility devices. They left wakes visible to radar, particularly in calm seas. They limited speed to a few knots. They required excellent seamanship in rough weather, as waves washing over the snorkel head would trigger automatic valves that cut air supply, creating dangerous pressure fluctuations inside the boat. By mid-1944, approximately 50% of U-boats operating from French bases were equipped with snorkels, but this improvement did not reverse the strategic situation. Submarines with snorkels survived longer, but they still could not sink enough merchant ships to affect Allied logistics. The revolutionary Type 21 electroboot represented Germany's most ambitious attempt to regain technological parity. This radical design featured streamlined hull form optimized for submerged operation, triple the battery capacity of conventional boats, 17.2 knots submerged speed compared to 7.6 knots for Type 7 boats, and sophisticated sonar systems. The Type 21 could theoretically outrun most surface escorts while submerged and remain underwater for extended periods. Had this design entered service in 1943 rather than 1945, it might have significantly extended the Battle of the Atlantic, but rushed production created severe quality problems. Of 118 boats constructed, only 4 were fully combat-ready before Germany's surrender. Only 2 conducted combat patrols in April and May 1945, achieving no sinkings before Germany surrendered. The final U-boat patrol of the war demonstrated both the Type 21's potential and the futility of German technological efforts. U-2511, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, departed on April 30th, 1945. On May 4th, the boat detected a British cruiser task force and executed a perfect attack approach, reaching firing position undetected despite Allied radar coverage. Schnee did not fire. Germany had already announced surrender negotiations. He surfaced and radioed his position on May 5, 1945, ending the U-boat war not with violence, but with acceptance of defeat. The hunter-killer group's contribution to Allied victory extended beyond their direct kill totals. By mid-1944, German submarine operations had been so thoroughly disrupted that U-boats posed no significant threat to the massive D-Day logistics build-up. Millions of tons of supplies, hundreds of thousands of troops, and thousands of ships crossed the Atlantic in the first half of 1944 with minimal losses. The contrast with 1942 was stark. Then, German submarines had nearly severed Britain's Atlantic lifeline. Now, 2 years later, they were irrelevant to major Allied operations. This transformation was not the result of any single factor. Improved convoy tactics, better sonar and radar, ultra-intelligence, long-range shore-based aircraft, and improved weapons all contributed. But hunter-killer groups added a critical offensive element that convoy defense alone could not provide. They took the war to the submarines, hunting them in their patrol areas, destroying them during transit, attacking their supply vessels, and creating psychological pressure that degraded effectiveness even when direct kills were not achieved. The statistics bore out this strategic impact. Between March 1943, when hunter-killer groups began deploying, and May 1945, when Germany surrendered, Allied forces sank approximately 580 U-boats. Hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers accounted for between 50 and 70 confirmed sinkings, depending on attribution methodology, roughly 10 to 12% of total kills. This understates their impact because it does not account for missions aborted, patrols shortened, refueling operations disrupted, or the general degradation of operational effectiveness caused by persistent hunting pressure. More significantly, hunter-killer groups demonstrated that offensive anti-submarine warfare was both feasible and effective. The concept would influence naval doctrine for decades. During the Cold War, the United States Navy formed modernized hunter-killer groups in anticipation of potential use of Soviet submarines to intercept shipping. Essex-class carriers were reclassified as anti-submarine warfare carriers. Destroyer escorts were modified with improved sonar and weapons. Operational doctrine anticipated each carrier would be accompanied by 8 escorts specifically optimized for submarine hunting. The organizational structure and tactical concepts derived directly from World War II experience, with groups like those commanded by Gallery, Isbell, and other pioneering officers. The human cost of this success was borne primarily by German submarine crews. The 75% casualty rate was not an abstraction. It represented 30,000 individual deaths, 30,000 families receiving notifications that fathers, sons, brothers would not return. The men who died were not monsters or fanatics. They were professional sailors doing their duty in a war they increasingly knew was lost. Interviews with survivors revealed men who had entered service believing in their invincibility, who experienced the gradual erosion of that confidence as Allied technology improved, and who ultimately faced each patrol knowing survival was mostly luck rather than skill. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke, captured when his U-515 was sunk in April 1944, provided particularly valuable testimony during interrogation at Fort Hunt, Virginia. Henke had been one of Germany's most successful commanders, sinking 25 Allied ships before his capture. His interrogation transcripts, declassified in 1985, revealed his understanding of Germany's defeat. "We were defeated not by superior courage or numbers," he said, "though both played roles. We were defeated by technology we could not match and industrial capacity we could not overcome. The Americans built ships faster than we could sink them. They developed weapons we could not counter. They deployed forces we could not evade. By late 1943, experienced commanders knew the war was lost. We continued because duty demanded it, not because we believed in victory." Henke's interrogation took a dark turn when he was falsely accused of war crimes related to survivors of a ship his submarine had sunk. Threatened with extradition to Britain to face charges, Henke became increasingly desperate. On June 15, 1944, he attempted to escape by climbing the perimeter fence at Fort Hunt. He was shot and killed by guards, becoming the only prisoner to attempt escape from the facility during World War II. His death illustrated the psychological trauma experienced by submarine officers who had gone from confident warriors to defeated prisoners, facing potential prosecution for actions they considered legitimate warfare. The contrast between German and American experiences was profound. American sailors in hunter-killer groups operated from positions of overwhelming advantage. They had superior technology, better intelligence, industrial support that ensured equipment was maintained and replaced, and most critically, the psychological confidence that came from winning. German submariners operated from positions of desperate disadvantage, with obsolete equipment, degraded intelligence, inadequate industrial support, and the psychological burden of knowing each patrol was likely their last. This asymmetry was most visible in the casualty rates. American escort carriers lost in the Atlantic numbered only one, USS Block Island, torpedoed on May 29, 1944 by U-549. 6 men died. The submarine itself was sunk 11 days later by destroyer escorts from the same task group that had lost Block Island, completing a cycle of revenge that demonstrated the hunter-killer group's ability to avenge their losses. Against this single American carrier loss, hunter-killer groups helped sink dozens of submarines and contributed to a broader campaign that destroyed 3/4 of Germany's submarine force. The final accounting of the Atlantic campaign confirmed the hunter-killer concept's effectiveness. Germany commissioned approximately 1,181 U-boats during World War II, Of these, 785 were destroyed, 648 lost to enemy action, and the remainder scuttled, lost to accidents, or stricken from service. Only 156 survived to surrender in May 1945. The destruction was systematic, comprehensive, and decisive. By war's end, the U-boat force that had nearly defeated Britain in 1942 had been reduced to strategic irrelevance, capable of inflicting only minor losses while suffering catastrophic casualties. Hunter-killer groups represented American naval power at its most effective. They combined technological superiority, industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and operational flexibility in formations that could be mass-produced and deployed in numbers the enemy could not match. The small escort carriers, converted from merchant hulls, embodied American industrial pragmatism. They were not glamorous ships, but they were adequate for the mission and available in quantity. The destroyer escorts screening them represented similar pragmatism, purpose-built vessels that sacrificed fleet speed and heavy armament for anti-submarine capability and mass production. The aircraft they carried were older models, but perfectly adequate for hunting submarines that had no air defense beyond light flak guns. This approach, using adequate equipment in overwhelming quantity rather than seeking perfect weapons in limited numbers, characterized American strategy throughout World War II. Germany produced technologically superior individual weapons, the Type 21 submarine, the Tiger, tank, jet aircraft. But these weapons arrived too late and in too few numbers to affect strategic outcomes. America produced adequate weapons in crushing quantities, Liberty ships, Sherman tanks, Wildcat fighters, and changed the war through mass rather than quality. The legacy of the hunter-killer groups extended far beyond their direct contribution to victory in the Atlantic. They demonstrated principles of offensive anti-submarine warfare that remained relevant through the Cold War and into the 21st century. The concept of combining aviation and surface forces in coordinated hunting operations became standard doctrine for all major navies. The emphasis on persistent pressure rather than defensive reaction influenced anti-submarine strategy for generations. The integration of intelligence, operational analysis, and tactical execution, pioneered by hunter-killer commanders, set standards for naval operations that endure to this day. For the German submarine crews who experienced the transformation from hunters to hunted, the lesson was brutal and unforgiving. Technology, industrial capacity, and operational innovation could defeat courage, skill, and determination. The ocean no longer provided sanctuary. American hunter-killer groups had seen to that, hunting U-boats wherever they operated, giving them no rest, no safe areas, no respite from constant pressure. The submarines that had nearly won the Atlantic for Germany in 1942 had been systematically destroyed by 1944, defeated by forces they could not match and tactics they could not counter. The story of hunter-killer groups is ultimately a story about the transformation of warfare through technology and industrial capacity. It demonstrates how military innovation, properly resourced and aggressively implemented, can reverse strategic situations that appear hopeless. In early 1943, Germany's U-boats seemed on the verge of severing Britain's lifeline. 18 months later, they were strategically irrelevant, destroyed by a combination of improved defenses and offensive hunting groups that gave them no sanctuary. The American sailors who manned those hunter-killer groups, flying small aircraft from small carriers, had accomplished something remarkable. They had helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, secured the supply lines that made D-Day possible, and ensured that German submarines would never again threaten Allied control of the seas. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.